Welcome to the weekly Canadian Gender Wars Report. My name is Shannon Boucher. My co-host is Melanie is here with me, and we're trying something new this week. We're zooming out from the gender issue, and we have some special guests here who are all from, is it fair to say the Durham region? Is that the right broad label for where everyone's from? We've got Cllr Lisa Robinson, Linda Stone, who was a DDSB school trustee, and Jess, who is, we know from the Parents' Rights Coalition of Canada, and so Durham, what's the parents group?
DDSB Concerned Parents.
DDSB Concerned Parents. So we've been engaged in conversation with Jess for quite some time. And we're going to be talking about some of the political antics going on in the Durham region. And I'm really looking forward to this conversation. I'm actually going to step back very shortly, but I want to and let Melanie facilitate some of this conversation. And you ladies all know each other, so this should be amusing to watch and just to be part of me from the sidelines. There's been some exciting stuff in the world of politics. Linda, how about you? Can you give us some context? Let viewers know, because we have viewers from across the country, where roughly in Canada you are, where in relationship to major landmarks, and is there something in the water in Durham region?
We've been asking ourselves that, but seriously, I think there's something in the water across Canada. So regionally, we are about half an hour east of Toronto. So you'd hit Pickering, Ajax, Whitby, and then Oshawa, and then further east is Bowmanville.
Okay, and Lisa, you're still currently a counselor. Are you? We followed your suspension. Are you still on suspension, or are you back in the mix? Can you fill us in about how you got into politics a little bit, and a little bit about who you are?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you really want me to get into politics and how I got here, I mean, I'm gonna take up all of your show. But I guess to sum it all up was that I just realized that, this was pretty much it was like a personal ambition of mine, because I didn't like the way that I saw how politics was being run, how everybody always said that it was a dirty game. And, I thought that I could definitely get in there and make a difference. And then becoming a city councilor, that I found out just really how dirty this game is. My first experience was I ran for an election back in 2018, and I actually lost by 174 votes. At that time, it was the first time that Pickering was using the Dominion voting systems. And on the night of the actual vote, the system had gone down. So people actually lost their democratic right to vote. So myself and some other people, we decided to file an application, and we were going to take the city of Pickering to court because of this. And of course, now this is my first experience with heavy-hitting lawyers coming after me and saying, you know what, Lisa, if you don't drop this application, we're going to end up taking your house, because it's going to cost you over $200,000 in legal fees to fight us. So, of course, everybody else who was on the application, they dropped the application. And of course, I'm a single mom. I have my own property, my own home. And, that just wasn't my hill to die on. So I had to drop the application. I was forced to drop it, obviously. And then it was like, you know what? Well, forget this. I'm not going to have this happen again. So I decided to go back to school. And I decided to get my paralegal degree, which I graduated with honors. And then I became a member with the Law Society of Ontario. And just as I was doing that, just before I wrote my exam, COVID hit. And my class was the first class that actually had to write our Law Society exams online with the lawyers and whatnot. And then it was at that time I started seeing what was happening with the politicians, the double standards, rules for thee and not for me. And then because of becoming a paralegal, it was the first time in my life, I'd have to say, that I was actually able to start seeing both sides of the story. Because before, I would always just listen to the politicians. I would always just listen to, the news, to the news people, whatever they said on CP24 to me was like, it was the truth. And when COVID hit, I started realizing, because of this newfound research that I learned how to do, I looked at my mom one day and I said, Mom, I feel like I've been lied to my whole entire life. And she says, well, you have been. And it was like, a spark that went off at that time. And so then I started speaking at Queen's Park and speaking out about what was happening, how people, they've all lost their democratic rights, the double standards. And, that's where I met a lot of these other wonderful, amazing women that are on the panel here today, was because of that. So it's like, without losing that very first election in 2018, I wouldn't be where I am today. So I'm very, very grateful for that, because that's what made me who I am today. And it's just made me stronger than ever. So now that I'm a Pickering councillor, and seeing that everything has been happening in the world, I decided that I was going to bring forward 3 motions. And these are motions that my constituents wanted me to bring forward. One had to do with only flying governmental flags on governmental buildings. Another one was that I was just going to make sure that for any of the drag shows or pride events or, the drag queen story time, that they were age appropriate. And then the third and final one was during COVID, again, the city of Pickering had decided they were going to revamp the recreation center. And when they did that, they took away people's rights to go and use a biological bathroom of their choice. So, for example, if you were a female, but you were a member over the age of 18, you're allowed to use an all-females washroom. If you're a male and you're over the age of 18 and you are a member, then you're allowed to use a male bathroom. But if you are a member under the age of 18, or if you're just a guest for the day, you are forced to use the universal change room. And so I was trying to bring a motion forward saying that, that you would have the choice to use whichever wash you want. But we were also going to keep the universal change room bathroom, which is also inclusive of all in all families. My colleagues didn't like that and started calling me transphobic and homophobic, and put me up in front of the integrity commissioner for that. And I ended up losing my pay for a quarter of my year's salaries because of it. So as
Wow.
you were saying that you said that I was suspended, I've never really been suspended because I still had to work, but my pay was suspended for a quarter of last year's salary. But right now I'm back to being paid, but I think there's might be some other, problems coming down the pipeline. So I might be working for free once again very shortly.
Wow. And Linda, you recently resigned from the DDSB as a trustee because of a bunch of machinations and kind of repeated encounters with the school board. Can you give viewers a little bit of a summary of what you've been through in the last, it's been going on a couple of years. What are some of the milestones along that journey that you've been on?
Well, it did start a few years ago, maybe even 3 years ago, when I was a trustee, and we were working on the human rights policy at the school board and doing my job as a trustee, which is to question the policies before we pass them. Staff bring you the policy in draft form and you read it over. It was a very long policy, and there were some very concerning areas for me. And when I brought those areas up and discussed them in a meeting, lo and behold, a few weeks later, I get integrity commissioner complaints about what I've said. Affinity groups complained, unions complained, and the complaints were from 3 board trustees and a member of the public. So this totally shocked me because it was in my purview to question what was in that human rights policy before it got passed. Some of the things that I brought up was the exactly what we're all talking about right now, actually. So I was a little prescient on those topics. So one of them was the term white supremacy. I said, I really am concerned about having this term in our human rights policy. I can see down the road how it could be weaponized. And sure enough, I hear over and over again how teachers are so tired of hearing this term. It's a derogatory term, and everybody conjures up, the KKK when you hear white supremacy. What they've done, and what we know that sort of leftist progressives do, is they change the terminology, they change the definition. You know all about that, I'm sure. And so the definition is not. It was changed, but I said it's still not going to be. It's still derogatory as soon as people hear that term. The other area that I talked about was parents not being told if their children are going to transition. This is 3 years ago. Children. I knew this was going to be a problem. If you don't tell the parents that children are transitioning at school, that takes the parents right out of it. And they put it under human rights policy. Honestly, I was looked at like I had three heads, and why would you even discuss that? So I said, could we please at least put a letter out to all the parents warning them that this could possibly happen, that your child could be socially transitioned at school without your knowledge. And they did not put the letter out. Another area where that I talked about was free speech, because it was right at the time of Carolyn Brzezinski's, her being thrown out or silenced at the Kitchener-Waterloo Board. Honestly, I don't think they had a clue what I was talking about, but I had read about her case and what was happening. So I brought that up and I said, I really hope this does not happen at our board. We cannot be tossing people out for asking questions that you think might be offensive or going against the human rights policy. Jessica knows all about this, right? So that was just the beginning. After that, from my Twitter account, my X account now, is people just took screenshot after screenshot after screenshot. In fact, before we came on, I was compiling a list of all the people, and you'll know all the people who I got complaints about from my Twitter account. Linda Blade, Chanel Fall, Shannon Boucher, we know him. Who else was there? Jen Speck, Redux, all these wonderful people. Jordan Peterson. I got complaints about just retweeting these people. And what was surprising to me was that most of the screenshots seemed to have been shared, among friends, and then they all put complaints in. That's my view of what happened. And so I continued to get complaints because I refused to stop using my Twitter. I'm not going to stop retweeting people, things that I think are correct or right. Especially my tweets were mostly about transitioning children and the effects of it, and the books that are in the classrooms, all the things that we're talking about. And even though the tweets were factual or coming from a detransitioner like Prisha Mosley or Chloe Cole, it was considered breaching the code of conduct, because all it takes is that someone needs to say, I'm offended, I'm hurt, I think it's hate speech, I think you're transphobic. So it doesn't matter if it's truth. It just matters how it's, and your intent doesn't matter. We know that now. Your intent doesn't matter. It's how it is affects another person that matters. So I got over 40 complaints. They just kept coming in. And here I am. I just thought they barred me finally until June 25th next year. I was allowed to go to board meetings, but wasn't allowed to attend any in-camera meetings and no other meetings of the board. So I thought this has completely pretty much removed me. I could not even put a motion forward. I wasn't going to get anybody backing that motion, I'm pretty sure, on that board. There were 7 or 8 new trustees. This really affected the board and what trustees understood. We never had integrity commissioners prior to this. So when they came in and when every board had to create a human rights policy, that's when you saw things starting to ramp up across the province, and I would say across the country. So I decided to step down, and there were other reasons why, which I'm not at liberty to speak about right now, but I decided to remove myself from the board, allow somebody else to step in who will be able to go to all the meetings and the in-camera meetings, and maybe they'll have a little more effect. And anyway, my voice is still here, and it's kind of fun being on this side rather than the other side, to be honest with you. And so my voice is still out there.
Well, speaking of being on the other side, Jessica, you've been organizing parents and organizing with not just in your region, but across the province and connecting with people across Canada. Tell us a bit about how you got involved and a little bit about the work that you're doing. And then Melanie's got some questions for the three of you, and we'll let her pick up from there.
Certainly. So I got involved because actually it was through Action for Canada. I had already been going through some things with my kids, but wasn't exactly sure where everything was coming from. And then Action for Canada was having a rally in front of one of my daughter's schools about some of the books that were in her school. And at first I was just like, what do you mean you're having a rally at my kid's school? Why is this? So when I went, I found out what was going on within the school, and that caused me to start digging deeper. And as I dug deeper, I started talking to more and more parents from my community and around Durham Region, and found that there was a lot of parents who felt that they had been betrayed by their government systems because they weren't listening to them at all whatsoever. If you dared to even question anything, you were made to feel as though you were completely isolated and alone. My child's school had 77 parents sign a petition to the board requesting that they investigate what was going on at that school. We've since found out things like our previous vice principal was using our school in part to write a thesis for her master's, which we believe that might have been part of the reason why parents were being ignored at that school in particular. And it just, we started finding there was more and more of this going on. And so we've started teaching parents how to speak up, what the process and like what the policies and procedures are, and, getting somewhere. Thankfully, we were able to write up 2 of the trustees for their statements that they put online against parents. We have more that are going to be put forward. And it's all from our members who have had enough, but don't feel as though they themselves can come forward for fear of retribution.
I'm really glad that we have this panel today. I'm really, really glad, because I live nearby. I don't live in Durham Region, but I live nearby, and I've been following some of these stories for a bit since I started being aware. I'm also a parent, so I became aware of some of the issues in school, first of all, and then other issues. I became aware of those issues afterwards. And right now, I feel like there is as you've all described in your stories, there is a problem with free speech, and there's a problem with censorship of ideas that are not deemed the correct opinion. And there seems to be very coordinated attacks, and I don't mean that hyperbolically, on people who are perhaps speaking against these particular ideas, or who are sharing ideas that are deemed unacceptable. And this really worries me, because my own research has made me aware of some of the radical political views in the school system and more broadly in the political system. And my concern is people need to be aware of it, first of all. And beyond that, then we need to start asking questions along the lines of, do we agree broadly as Canadians for some of these things? Now, if people do, great, but first we need to be aware of it. So this is why I'm really pleased to have this panel today, because I think it'd be really interesting to talk about some of the details of these, of some of the things that have been going on with you guys. And I'll start with Lisa. So in Pickering, there have been multiple occasions now where delegates have been silenced. And very, very recently, one delegate was actually arrested for her delegation that the mayor didn't like. Do you want to tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. There has been a lot more public involvement, public engagement at our council meetings as of late because of everything that has been happening. So one of the things that had happened was that at a couple of meetings ago, what they did was they brought in behind the scenes, following procedure, but procedure that most people don't know about. So they brought in about 18 delegates to come and speak poorly of me because of an op-ed that I wrote about Black history. Because I was just making my view that we need to stop judging each other by the color of our skin. And I'm really, really against that. So, I brought up the whole entire fact, where, oh my goodness, I can't think of his name right now. Jessica, help me out. Who was it that said, oh my goodness, Black chap?
Thomas Sowell or?
No. The one that said, don't.
Martin Luther King Jr.
No, but I do love Martin King Jr. But no. He's a celebrity.
Morgan Freeman.
A celebrity pardon?
Morgan Freeman.
Morgan Freeman, yes. So if Morgan Freeman had said, don't refer to me as a Black man, and I won't refer to you as a white man. I'll refer to you, you refer to me by my name, and I'll call you by your name. And the gentleman that was interviewing him said, well, how are we going to stop racism then? And Morgan Freeman openly said, well, stop talking about it. So at the city of Pickering, ever since, I got on council, it's all been about, anti-race this, anti-race that, and of course by calling me the transphobic and homophobic. And so our council meetings, more people started becoming more and more engaged. So after I wrote this op-ed piece, behind the scenes, they had 18 people show up to speak against me. And of course, I was basically sideswiped at a meeting because none of us knew that this was happening because it all happened behind the scenes. So now I'm sitting there and I have to listen to groups and 18 delegates sit there and call me names, speak poorly of me, tell me I'm of white privilege. And I couldn't even have any rebuttal against it because I wasn't allowed to have a conversation. It was not a debate. It was a delegate speaking, and all I could do was ask them questions. Well, I was going to ask questions and fuel the fire. But as I was listening to all of these people speak, I realized that all of them had great ties with the city of Pickering. The first group that spoke, the Carrie and Fenn Foundation, they actually received thousands and thousands and thousands. We're talking probably over $25,000 or around that mark. I'm not sure the exact amount from the mayor's gala. And then we have the Anti-Black Racism Task Force who, a year before received $25,000 from the city of Pickering. And all of a sudden this year, that went up to $85,000. So they just got another $60,000 for what in a year. And then, of course, other members, other people that spoke to me, one of the school trustees that was going really, really heavy on Linda Stone, Emma Cunningham, her husband got up and spoke at the council meeting, again, speaking very, very ill of me. So since all of that what happened at the last meeting was that they decided to bring a motion forward saying that, no more can people outside of Pickering come and speak as delegates in our city of Pickering chambers, which is really disturbing. So if you were to take over the last few months, how you can see it progressing is a couple of months ago, they decided to change the policy from delegates being able to speak for 10 minutes down to 5 minutes. And then they removed the question and answer period, which is before council meetings, there was an open period of 15 minutes where anybody who was there, if they want to speak a question to the mayor, then they could ask them that question. and then if he couldn't answer it, he would delegate who would answer that. But because it wasn't being utilized, they decided that they were going to get rid of it. But in my opinion, if it wasn't being utilized and why bother getting rid of it? Leave it there. So this, they did that. And then what they also did was they decided that nobody could record in our chambers anymore, because they were quite upset about that. Because when delegates, like, such as the woman that was arrested, everybody had their phones out and they're recording it. And of course, the city of Pickering doesn't like that. So now they've decided to bring a rule that nobody at all can record in our chambers. So it's been pretty disturbing to see the way that democracy has been eroding in my own chambers. And then, so after that happened, the following council meeting, 18 people or so, came and spoke on my behalf. And the city of Pickering didn't like that very much. And it was at that meeting that this woman got arrested because she wouldn't basically shut up. The mayor tried to shut her down. And he doesn't like it when you disobey him, let's say. And she ended up getting arrested because of it for trespassing. So it was very, very disturbing. She's like 60, I think it is, 60, 65. And there were 4 young police officers escorting her out, even though she said that she was going to leave. But because the mayor was yelling at her so much, everyone got very, very, I guess, tensions were high, and they ended up arresting the poor woman.
Well, they arrested
Can
her.
I ask?
Sorry, I was there at that meeting, and as she was going out the door is when they arrested her. She was leaving on her own after she had finished speaking and serving the city with papers. And while she was walking out the door, the police officers decided to arrest her and give her a notice of trespass.
I watched a little bit of that, and to put more context into it, she accused, and I'm sure correct me on the details, but the delegate accused the city of Pickering of breaking the law and tried to serve some papers. Is that correct? And the mayor was not happy with this, and then she was asked to leave. She left, and then as she was leaving, she was arrested. I think she was released very shortly after or immediately after. But the premise of this was that a high drama situation where she was serving the city for breaking the law.
Yeah,
Exactly what was happening.
He literally, I'm going to say about a third of the way into her delegation, the mayor cut her off from speaking. He then proceeded to request to empty the chambers. She finished her delegation in front of who chose to stay, which included, I believe it was the head of security, along with the police officers in question, and a few members of the chambers who were still there. And when she finished, like I said, she handed it over to the head of security, her paperwork, and then she walked with the police officer. She was not dragged out. She was leaving on her own. It was not until she got.
So there's a lot of high drama in Pickering. I don't remember if it was this meeting or another meeting, but I remember you, Lisa, mentioning that the board were whispering about delegates. I believe it was the same meeting. Is that correct?
Yeah, it was the same evening as other delegates were speaking in favor of me, and not so much in favor of the council because of their erosion of their democratic rights at this time. As delegates are speaking, I've got my fellow councils here calling them crazy, saying that they're conspiracy theorists, they're rolling their eyes, they're saying just shut them down. And I'm hearing this, so I actually had to raise my hand and ask for a moment of personal privilege and say, you know what, this is absolutely ridiculous, that you're treating these people like this, because this is what I'm hearing. It's horrible. I mean, I didn't realize, I realized very, very quickly being a council, when we're sitting up there, we should be paying attention to the delegates. But I mean, we even have our mayor in a video where he thinks it's more important to be watching a hockey game than it is to actually be paying attention to what the people are speaking. And this, I mean, he's on video, you know, we're sitting there, we're trying to have a conversation. We're talking about, you know, millions and millions of dollars that are about to be spent from the city. And here he is watching a hockey game.
Yeah, I find that really interesting that the people in positions of influence who are supposed to be, upstanding members of the community, as it were, who are speaking so negatively about citizens, about people bringing issues to them. And Linda, you've had similar experiences where you've received personal attacks for having, the wrong opinion, even though we keep hearing over and over again that, they're doing this for inclusion. They're doing this for kindness. They're doing this to protect people from harm. And you've certainly been on the receiving end of a lot of very, very questionable behavior.
Oh, definitely. I've been called just about every name under the book. I received terrible emails, phone messages, etc. But my duty as a trustee was also the mental health and well-being of students. So this is what I was trying to get through to the other trustees, especially in my rebuttals. I started to do the rebuttals from the complaints I explained every single retweet or tweet that I made and why I made it, and explaining to them, this is what puberty blockers do to children. This is what social transitioning does to children. I was actually just taking the time through the rebuttal, taking an advantage of it almost, to explain to them what is actually going on, and that it is my duty to make sure that these children are safe and that we are treating them with the utmost of care within our schools. So I knew that there is no way, if you're socially transitioning a child, you're concretizing that idea into the child's head when they say that I am transgender, I think I'm a boy instead of a girl, and without looking at the background of that child, is that child suffering from some other trauma? The teachers are not doing that because it's affirmation. So you just take their word for it. Well, this was not proper care in my view. So whether or not I was going against the code of conduct in their eyes, I didn't care, because my view was we're harming these children. And now I feel vindicated because of the CAS review, because of the WPATH files. I'm totally vindicated on this. In fact, I sent that, the CAS review to, not the whole review, but saying, this is what happened. I'm vindicated. I sent that to some of the trustees saying, this is what I've been trying to tell you. You cannot just go ahead and socially transition these children, not tell their parents, not know what their background is. It's harmful. And now we know it absolutely is. The surgeries are irreversible. The puberty blockers are irreversible. It mentally, physically, emotionally harms not only the children, but the families involved. So it is incumbent on our school boards to look into this and make sure that they are not harming children through this affirmation. And I think that they are absolutely going to have to look at this more deeply and more seriously. And so but I mean, the names just came. As soon as you say anything about children transitioning, you're called transphobic. Doesn't matter what you're saying. If they don't agree with you, you're transphobic. Well, you can call me whatever you want. I try to emphasize I don't care if people transition when they're older. It is the children that I was concerned about, always.
Yeah, well, it raises questions about the concept of harm and what that means. You were talking, Lisa, earlier about, not Lisa, pardon me, Linda, you were talking about the changing definitions, the manipulation of language and meaning. And harm is one of those things that appears to be very clearly manipulated to mean something else. Now, my understanding at this point is that harm is harm to a particular way of looking at the world rather than necessarily harm to an individual. And in this case, when we're talking about trans children, it seems to me that the harm is that people may lose their belief in this social constructivist way of looking at the world rather than actual physical harms that children might go through, right? And in your case, Lisa, the harm might be a same far left sort of political ideology, but not necessarily just trans. It might be in a broader sense, like harm to the idea of anti-racism, which, as we know, is just another form of racism. I mean, what are your feelings on that? Like, do you think there's, do you think, first of all, do you think more people are becoming more aware that these things are manipulated, that a small number of people have decided to push these ideas forward and are not necessarily being truthful in them?
That's exactly what's happening. And yes, I can see that the tide is changing at this time. Like, I can honestly say, like, the support that I have been receiving, not only from here in Pickering, but across Durham, and from actually every province in Ontario, and even abroad now in the States. People have been reaching out to me and backing me and saying, like, how much this is, like, been orchestrated all around the world at this point. And that we have now become the majority. Is just that there's a silent majority, because a lot of people are afraid right now to speak up, like, like the Linda Stones of the world, or like, the Jessicas of the world, because they are going to be name called. They're going to be called, labeled as being transphobic, white supremacy, white privilege. They just start talking and putting labels on people, because they don't know how to have an adult conversation anymore. And they can't debate the issue. They know that there is harm that's happening by doing what they're doing, but they know that they're wrong. And it goes back to that. I always go back to this to really to explain it to people correctly. Have you ever had that time where you have, loaned a friend money, and all of a sudden that friend stops talking to you? Either they get into a fight with you, or they stop talking to you. Well, why? Because they might not have the money to pay you back, and they're ashamed that they don't have the money, or maybe they just don't want to. So what they do is they figure that if they just ignore you, if they get into a fight with you, that you're going to go away. And I think that is basically what is happening right now. Because, like, when all my counselors, they started attacking me, what's the first thing they did? They started ignoring me. And then they started playing, like, these psychological harassment games on me. So when we would go to events, they would start putting their backs to me. They wouldn't socialize with me. They would start cropping me out of photos as if I was never at the events. It's insane, the games that these people play when they don't like, something that you have said. And it's really, really disgusting to see that people that are in places of leadership, people who we're supposed to be depending on to, to help rule the citizens, or to help, be someone for the citizens to look up to and, admire and, give them strength and hope. They're doing just the opposite right now. It's absolutely, it's insane in my world what's happening.
Melanie.
And Linda, do you, yes.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to ask, do you think that now with the WPATH files and the CAS review, that the Durham board will perhaps maybe take a peek at those and review their idea of harm?
No, absolutely not. No, I don't think they will at all. I think they're so dug into their ideology, they will not take a look at it. And if they do, they will. We already know that some people are trying to say that the CAS review is illegitimate, or it's been fact checked, or all of this garbage. They will not. I've had some conversations with some of the trustees, and it's the same old thing that they bring up the suicide, they bring up the puberty blockers are reversible, and all the old ideas that are proven false now. And so, no, I don't think so. One, also, I think that they are disinterested, some of them. Two, some of them have no idea. I knew when my complaints were coming in that some of the trustees would have no idea what my tweets and retweets were talking about. They just are either not interested or clued into about what social transitioning and the transitioning of children and the harms. And three, the ideology that they are so dug into. a lot across Canada, I would say, or across Ontario anyway, we know that several of the boards have been taken over by a lot of the NDP or union people, and they are of a certain idea. The other thing, though, Melanie, that is a little worrisome to me, not just about the child transitioning. I was listening to the podcast, I don't know if you've heard it yet, with Jordan Peterson and Bruce Party. And
Yes. Brilliant
yes,
podcast.
it was fantastic. I've listened to it a few times now, and I thought, okay, we're really in trouble here, because it is embedded into our law now that it does not matter whether or not you meant to be harmful. Most people are not meaning to be harmful with what they're saying. It's how the person takes it. So what I was saying before was intent does not matter. It's whether or not, it's how that person perceives what you said. And then so many times my complainants would say, it's hate speech. You're being hateful. You're harmful, just like you were saying, Melanie. I had a trustee who would not really speak to me because she said, you're a harmful person. So this is embedded in law. And now that it's gone there, I don't think it matters what we're proving, right or wrong. That's what scares me. Truth doesn't matter. I was speaking the truth the whole time in my rebuttals and trying to speak the truth to the trustees. It did not matter. It was how people perceived what I was saying. That's frightening.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe I would jump in at this point for viewers, because it took me a long time to understand this, and it ties to what you're saying, Linda. And that is how, and what Bruce Party and Jordan Peterson were talking about, and that is how these authorities are constructed. So back in 2013, 2014, in Ontario, we had the Ontario Human Rights Commission include gender identity as a protected class. And that's along with based on race, based on sex, based on ability or disability. And there's a number of different protected class categories. And the idea of the Human Rights Commission and these human rights rules is to protect people from discrimination in certain areas. And those are housing, employment, contracts, like memberships. There's a fifth one I always forget. But basically, the idea is that someone shouldn't be discriminated based on these immutable characteristics, which is, I think, an important part of our legal system. But in the creation or the addition of that law, then the OHRC empowers an interpretation of the law into a policy document. And the policy document is what gives institutions guidance on how to create environments that are in compliance with the law. And it's like a game of telephone. So you have the law that says you can't discriminate based on immutable characteristics. Then you've got a policy. And then in that policy document, it says institutions have to create their own policies. So school boards start creating policies. We've got this game of policy telephone. At every stage, the policy gets reinterpreted. And somewhere along the line, a switch gets flipped. And the switch is, it's no longer about discriminating against somebody because of immutable characteristics and preventing them from accessing something. It becomes a positive law, and that we have to create circumstances now where transgender people feel included. There's no connection at all anymore to stopping people from being discriminated against. It is now we have to the gender affirming toolkit that Melanie spent so much time on is this has to be part of every classroom in every school every day, and everybody has to get treated by default basically like a trans kid, so that the trans kids don't feel left out.
That's called gender facilitative schools.
And don't forget,
and
Shannon.
It's similar. Please go ahead.
Sorry, this is just adding to it a little bit. Don't forget that I'm pretty sure Bruce was mentioning that whites cannot be discriminated against.
Well, because power and privilege, you see. And so it's not possible for white having all the power and all the privilege to be discriminated against for equity reasons, which makes entire sense. If you're coming from that sort of progressive mindset, that far left radical, and let's be honest, this is underpinned by Marxist philosophy, that you cannot be discriminated against if you're in a position, if you're the hegemony is the word, if you are the dominant class, because you are the dominator, the oppressor, and so only the victim could ever experience discrimination. So that tracks, and I think people need to understand that, and that's why Bruce Pardy's discussion with Peterson was brilliant. I think he described that very, very well and taught me some things that I didn't know.
And
yeah.
The other frightening thing about this is that these things will be weaponized. Like I was on Twitter and I had mentioned that the book Grave Error. It's a great book. Read it. This is a different view of what perhaps happened, and so a couple of Indigenous people started to come at me on Twitter. We're going back and forth. And of course, they're taking screenshots and saying, have you taken enough screenshots yet? Can't wait till Bill C-63 comes through so that we can use this hate against her. That just happened to me. So that will be weaponized without a doubt if that bill goes through.
And we learned in that podcast too that there's no accountability mechanisms. The rules of evidence don't apply. You don't have to face your accusers. These complaints can come anonymously. They can get weaponized. There's no fact checking involved.
Well, he called it. Didn't he call it agile governance, as in the management method where you just adapt as you go along? I thought that was a brilliant way of describing it. Mm-hmm. Right? You just keep adapting it all the time. Keep changing it depending on your need.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
do any of you see any way around this?
Well, I know that the school boards use the main focus is the Ontario Human Rights Code. So until we can start to change those policies, that code, have other people have a fair group of people with different views and opinions sitting on the human rights panels. Or creating these policies, then I don't think I'm not hopeful, to be honest. I see it infiltrated by so many different areas. Look at the Amy Ham trial. That just blew my mind, hearing some of the words that and some of the phrases and things that were coming out of that. I'm worried about the future, to be honest. And I think so many different institutions have just fallen for this without any type of critical thinking about what are we doing here. And, Melanie, it's when you talk about equity, diversity, and inclusion, I mean, this was just deadly, really, for it to be brought into the schools and not to have anything else. Not to be able to have an opinion against that. Like it shuts people up. People are frightened. So I know there's trustees who would say behind doors, closed doors, I agree with a lot of what you're saying. They don't have the courage to speak up. They're afraid for their jobs. Believe me, if I were younger and had a full-time job, I may not have done what I did, because like even now, if I'm having a conversation on Twitter or whatever on Facebook, people will bring up the awful newspaper articles about me. Say, "Oh, is this the Linda Stone we're talking about? Is this the Linda Stone?" Like it has affected my whole life, everything, my volunteer positions, everything. So I don't blame people for being afraid to speak up. I really don't. It could wipe out your income and affect your family so much. But for us to have gotten to this point it's not a cohesive society. This is not how we get along. This is not how we can continue and go forward. It's breaking people apart.
On that point, you raised a really interesting, talking about citizens. You're talking about regular citizens, and both you ladies have spoken about colleagues either jumping in on the bandwagon, whether they agree with it or not, because it could be that they're fearing. So for you, Lisa, I mean, it could be that some of your colleagues don't actually agree with the way that you're being treated, but they don't want to be treated that way. And so, of course, they're going to, be part of the Mean Girls Club. And for you, Linda, you've been told by other people that how you've been treated is not okay, but they're too afraid to say anything. And so there's an issue here that I've seen in my own life too. Many, many, many people do see that these things are going on and don't agree with them. They don't think this is correct. And yes, there is fear. But we're here at this stage because but in part because many, many people who disagree with what's going on have not stuck their neck out like some of the people in this chat right now. I'm trying to have more empathy with the people who won't say anything, but I feel like if citizens don't stick their necks out, this only gets worse. So, like you said, these kinds of policies, like Bill 63, if that goes through, of course it will be weaponized, but this will also be weaponized eventually against the very people that support it, because currently the zeitgeist is in their favor in this sort of like progressive neo-Marxist mindset, right? So the real question is, how do we encourage, if possible, how do we encourage people to speak out? So I'm going to turn this a little bit to unions now, because we know through some of the activities of some people in Durham that many union members are not for a lot of the policies that union members are putting forward. So, for example, the trans affirming toolkit and many of these trans policies in education are heavily supported by unions, not just teachers, but unions. And so unions will have professional development around trans policies, and they were heavily involved in counter-protesting the Million Marches, which was not transphobia. This was about parents saying, we want to have a say in our education, right? This is parents wanting to be involved in education and wanting to participate in that. And we were counter-protested. There was even a leak. I'll just remind viewers, there was a leak right before the protest where many union heads had got together to say how horrible these Nazi parents were, and they were going to do everything they could to shut us down. One of them even said that he had seasoned activists who were willing to intimidate parents and follow them and take pictures of their license plates and so on and so forth. So the unions are heavily involved in some of this social justice stuff, which is a far move away from their initial purpose, which was representation on labor issues. So when we're talking about, I suppose you could twist it around and say transing children in school maybe has something to do with labor if you do some mental gymnastics, but it has nothing to do with that. And yet they're so involved in these sorts of things for ideological reasons. But we know that many of the members, Jess, who isn't here, I'm trying to contact her, see if she'll come back, but Jess has spoken one-on-one to many union members who don't agree with some of the policies that the unions are putting forward. We've seen online, right before the protest when this leak came out and afterwards, how many union members were expressing their disgust with some of the things that were going on within the unions. They had no idea. The real purpose of talking about all of this is, how do we encourage the public to be less fearful? So just as a side, both you, Lisa, and Linda, and Shannon have experienced an enormous amount of pushback. You have been smeared publicly, and you've had very directed attacks at both of you. Now, I haven't. That could change in the future, but I guess I'm just here to say that doesn't happen to everybody, right? And many people who are not in this chat or who are not public have spoken out, and they have not necessarily been attacked either. And so it doesn't happen to everyone. When it happens, it's terrible. But it doesn't happen to everyone. And I'm just wondering if you have any ideas on how we can encourage people to maybe speak up a little bit more, because even if you do receive consequences in your life, we're all going to suffer enormous consequences if we're too fearful to speak out.
Am I back in now?
Yes, welcome back.
I was watching you for the last bit, and apparently it wasn't recording me. That explains why I was like, nobody can hear me.
Well, welcome back.
Thank you.
Melanie, I hear from a lot of, I've heard from a lot of teachers, and I can't tell them to go and speak to your union reps, or, I mean, I can, but they are still very frightened because they've got quite a few years still to go within the school system. Those who are almost closer to retirement are more daring and more bold about speaking up. And but it's a great question. What can we do? They could, if more of them got together and shared their views, more of the people, the union members who are in agreement and don't agree with the union heads, they can turn things around with their votes. Easily turn things around. I don't know how what percentage of voters, what percentage of teachers or union members actually vote, but they have way more power than they know, and so I would love to see that happen, but I don't personally know quite how to do that.
Pretty small numbers. I think Ottawa Carleton District School Board is kind of a success story in that regard. A number of teachers got together, and when there were positions open for the local union rep and whatever the distribution of authority that is, they ran for those positions, and they did so kind of under the radar without declaring their politics publicly, and they were able to take over some of those positions. And so that has been a way of wrestling back some of this control. And we saw it with Lisa Bildy and Bruce Party 4 or 5 years ago now, when they pushed back against, they call it the Stop SOP, the Statement of Principles, for the Ontario bencher election in the Law Society. They weren't able to do it successfully a second time last year, but this is it's a game of organization, I think, for all of us, because it seems like the choices and opportunities are narrowing, especially with, Lisa, you were talking about the reduction of time for delegations, the restrictions on who could delegate, the removal of question periods. We've seen the same sorts of things here in Ottawa. They cut from 10 minutes down to 4 minutes maximum. They extended the no duplication or no extra delegation from 6 months to a year. They gave the chair discretion as to who they would allow. At some boards in Ontario and in BC, you have to submit the delegation in writing first for approval. So in order to criticize the government, you have to get the government's approval on what you can say or not, which goes entirely against the spirit of democracy.
Yes, it does. It's a horrible thing. And, even in our last meeting, they decided they were going to bring forward that if you're not a resident of Pickering, then you won't really be able to delegate either, unless, you have basically written authority by, a couple members of council, and or they vote on it.
Yeah,
which again is horrible, because if you have anyone who has critical thinking skills, or who's going against the narrative of the current council right now, like let's say if Jessica or if Linda wanted to come and speak at my council right now, even though they live in Durham, they're going to now have to submit a request to speak, and I can guarantee that my council is not going to vote to let them speak. So democracy just done right now at the city of Pickering for that reason.
Even those groups that represent some of the constituents have to submit through the council, get approval from 2 council members, which when we're looking at that council currently from that FOI that was released, that showed from the Million March for Children, that they clearly are biased. It definitely showed. We had already submitted to them that we were there for parental inclusion, and that we were there for things to be taught at an age-appropriate level. There was nothing about anti-LGBTQ. There was none of that mentioned, and yet the city staff decided to put forth the items from that leaked union meeting from Antifa to council, and that's what they chose to go off of, which personally, I believe that was them showing their politics, being partisan. And I believe that government service employees are supposed to be nonpartisan because they're supposed to be able to present things no matter who's elected into office. That's clearly not what's going on in Pickering at the moment.
Yeah, no, it's definitely not what's happening.
And the board, for that matter.
Yeah,
They
exactly.
both put out almost identical statements.
Melanie and,
Yeah.
and Shannon, sorry to interrupt, but you both have been working on these issues as well for a long time. What sort of, do you have ideas about how to go about changing things instead of the way they are now? How do we get more people involved and speaking up?
That's a great question. That's why I was asking you, because as I've been doing more reading, so I tend to read a lot of the academics or the academic literature at the minute in queer pedagogy, so teaching methods in queer theory, and I've been trying to share that with the public to maybe translate that from postmodern to English for people. And people have been asking me, well, what do we do about it? How can we fix it? How do we turn it around? And I honestly don't have much of an answer to them. And I've sort of seen myself as a translator and a pointer of what's going on. And I wish I had a solution, and I don't. And I would like to encourage more people to feel more confident to speak up. I guess that's why I've been reading the literature, so other people don't have to, but they'll be informed in that way. And that's kind of where I'm coming from at the minute. That's why I have this show with Shannon. That's why I've been trying to deconstruct the deconstructionists for people as well. I feel at the minute, this is just my speculation, but at the minute, many people understand that there are problems, that they don't really like what they're seeing, whether it's in schools or in society in general. But I'm not sure that most people can put their finger on what it is that's really the problem. And that's kind of what I'm trying to do is to indicate where those problems are coming from, the source of them, because I don't know what else to do, because I would like to see people saying something, but I understand many people are fearful, and the project fear and intimidation has been incredibly successful. People with Machiavellian and narcissistic type personalities have definitely taken over positions of power in small numbers. It makes it seem like they are the overwhelming majority when they are not. I know that when I started realizing that there were issues, I knew it was wrong, but I was afraid to speak to my neighbor, my trainer, people at the supermarket. I was afraid to talk about them. I didn't know why I wasn't allowed to have those opinions, but I knew I wasn't allowed to have those opinions. Now I feel probably a lot of people still feel that way. For me, doing this show is my way of maybe helping people be a bit more confident that it isn't just you, and many people are seeing this. And we do it from a Canadian context too. There's a lot of, I guess, political citizen journalist shows out there, but there's not really a lot of content similar to ours as much as there is American and British people covering sort of the gender wars. So, I mean, that's my only solution at the minute. I'm sure Shannon has other suggestions on how to, encourage other people to get involved.
Melanie and I take turns with the black pill. I don't want to say recently. Melanie's more black pilled than I am, and
that's because I'm stuck in the ideology, and it ain't pretty.
I tend towards naive optimism sometimes, and I think that serves me well, because I'll go and do things even though other people might know on the surface, well, that's probably not going to work. But I keep pushing. So right now, my hope with the cast review, and there was some tremendous efforts by a number of groups in Canada immediately following the release of the cast report, reaching out to members of parliament, MPPs and MLAs in various provinces in Canada, letting them know. So there are active letter writing campaigns and groups doing analysis, and there's even some chatter recently that a few of those people that have been, we have secret undergrounds in Canada, who are working on these issues, professionals, doctors, psychiatrists, therapists, endocrinologists, parents, legal professionals, and some of the chatter I'm hearing recently is that a couple of them are thinking they might be able to go public with their names, which is a good sign. I see good signs. We saw, normally the Gender Wars report is focused on media. That's kind of why I started writing about this, because there was no media coverage of these political happenings, especially around the gender issue. This week, the Globe and Mail published a long opinion piece. The first time the GNM has done something like that on the issue of gender. Their health reporter has actually been Andre Picard, very much about protecting trans kids and running that whole thought-stopping narrative. And the Globe has now broken the dam on that topic. We're seeing great movement in Quebec, although with the two solitudes, we don't always hear what's going on. There's a tribunal appointed. None of them are activists. They're professionals in medicine and law, and they have a 2-year mandate to investigate everything to do with gender. The washrooms, the healthcare, the school policies, the books, everything. And they're 6 months or more into that project right now. My hope, and I have, Linda, you read a draft, I think, of a letter that I'm working on. Melanie helped me with that. It's getting reviewed right now by a researcher and a lawyer. And the aim is, I'll share the strategy with everybody, right? Mr. CEO of Children's Hospital of Eastern Ontario and the director of our Catholic school board, our public school board, you're on the button. You have to act now. And you're going to resign. You're going to resign because the Board of Trustees is going to fire you for being a transphobe, or you're going to resign because when it comes out that you failed to act on the knowledge and you failed to undertake your duty to protect children with clear and fair warning, that you failed in your obligation. So either way, you're going to resign. There's only one way through this, and that's the path of truth. To look at the science, to appoint a panel, to have this reviewed by a half a dozen or 10 doctors at the Children's Hospital independently, and make a decision about the gender clinic here in Eastern Ontario. And if our education minister and our health minister and our premier aren't going to take action on this from a policy perspective, we need to single a few people out. And we live in a world, unfortunately, of political manipulations. And so I'm gonna name 3 people in positions of power and force them to a decision point. And not doing something is doing something in this case. So if they ignore it, well, that's actually doing something, and that's going to have an impact. We are now past the point of being able to say, well, I didn't know. And so to register that with those people in positions of authority, and what it means for the school boards is that they are going to have to go and change their policies. They're going to have to get people in there to look at those policies and say, wait a second, how did we get from not discriminating against trans-identified people in housing to firing people for questioning books in libraries or retweeting Douglas Murray? How did that happen? And somewhere along the line, someone's going to have to take responsibility. And that's, in my naive way, is my hope that we can nudge this along. And the Overton window is opening, right? We've got Pierre Poilievre has talked about this. We've got premiers. I was super lucky to shake hands with Blaine Higgs a couple of weeks ago when he was in Ottawa, and then bumped into him in the corridors of a club late at night after we'd both had a couple of drinks and had a laugh. There are things happening, but it's really terrible in the meantime. Like the abuse that I see people taking,
Yep.
I'm still, I hate the word traumatized, right? But I'm still informed and motivated by getting mobbed thanks to the OCDSB when they sent a letter to, parents of 72,000 kids about hate and bigotry and no room for this, and we're aware that there's protesters going to be on this street at this time, and then having us mobbed by hundreds of people. It still blows my mind that in a democracy, that a political institution and elected officials would use their power to do that, to shut up citizens. It's
Yes, so
it's
that's
wild
not
work.
democracy, is it?
No, it's
not
dictatorship.
Tyranny.
Yeah.
And,
No,
Melanie,
what I
going
guess-
back to what you were saying, how do we get people involved? I do know that, like yourself, Shannon, it's when people are personally affected by what is going on. So many times they will just ignore it or think that's not really happening until it happens to them or a family member. And then all of a sudden their eyes are opened, and then they're full on into trying to change what's going on, especially now with the boys and the men entering women's sports. That's a huge issue, and it needs to be dealt with. And more parents, hopefully now more men, more dads will start to speak up about that. But those policies, although then look at this, Biden just changes Title IX. So they dig in harder. That was a couple of steps backwards for women. So I don't think we can give up. I don't know how many people, I think just speaking up like you and Shannon are doing, Melanie, and all of us are doing. And the more we speak up, the more our voices will be heard and it will be shared. Like I have had incredible support, like hundreds and hundreds of people. I have file folders of letters that I printed off from people who supported me. That's what keeps you also going and going strong, because you know that you are speaking truth and you know that you're right and you know that you have a lot of people behind you. And yes, how do you also get them involved? A lot of them are involved, but I think it goes deeper than just speaking up as to what we're doing. I think it's also, we've got to get the policies changed. It's got to be through getting more involved and sitting on those areas where you can change policy, lobby the government. There's several different ways we're going to have to do it. But the one thing also that it was a little bit alarming to me when going back to the Bruce Party and Peterson talk was Bruce saying, yes, we all know this is wrong, but the students have been taught to think this way. So now you have law students coming up thinking the exact same way. They will be running the law firms. They will be the judges. They will be the magistrates. What do we do then? How do we change it then? How do you, it's so insidious. It's so deep, and it's been happening for decades, as you all know, through the education system. It will take decades to get out of this.
Yeah, I think that you hit the nail on the head as to what I'm trying to do research on right now and advocate for. My position is not to eliminate it. My position, or what I'm trying to advocate for, I'm trying to write a piece for the news right now, if I can get that published, is to advocate for public discussion and wide consent across the board as to what we want the education system to look like, because a lot of this stuff has been subversive and I didn't consent to this. Nobody has. So some people be happy, some people are not happy, but the public education system is public and therefore needs to be accountable to the public. And without wide public consent to do something so radical, there's an ethical issue here. And so that's the kind of position that I'm trying to take, and to take that message wherever I can, so that at least people can start talking about this. But I would really like to hear from Jessica, because we're talking about the power of what we can do.
Yeah.
And Jessica, you've been doing an awful lot, and you dropped out of our conversation, so we haven't heard much from you. So I'd love to hear from you. What can you share about your group and what you guys have been doing? Because you've been very, very active.
So one of our biggest things has been trying to give a voice to those who aren't being listened to. Because as you guys have all been saying, there's a lot of people who, thanks to cancel culture, don't feel as though it's either safe to bring their voice forward, or they just feel super intimidated by the whole entire thing, because they've seen so many people get bullied by those with a very focused view. And so we've been helping people with doing things like writing emails to their their principals or to their superintendents, to their trustees, and showing them what the different policies and procedures are. Because if you're going to get to the point that you're at the ombudsman, if you haven't done all the steps prior to, you're not going to be listened to. So we've been there to help out numerous parents. We have, in fact, a parent right now who they've been silenced by the board from even, they are only allowed to email one person at the board once a week. They were not even copied in on the updates of what's going on with their children. The board decided to put that forward to their partner. And as a result, now that person has completely pulled their children out of the Durham District School Board because they had no choice but to. Their child's classroom was plied with ideology, and there was no room for anything else. Their child was behind academically, along with all the other children in the class, because there was so much focus on this ideology that they're not teaching our children academics anymore. They're teaching them more so about social justice. So we've been helping parents have a voice again. And I really do believe that the more we speak up about these things, like how you and Shannon are doing, how Linda and Lisa are doing, and my group, the more that we talk about these things in public and have these conversations, the more others feel comfortable to have these conversations. It's important to talk. The more you do, the less taboo it is.
Yeah, and privately as well. I think there are many people who are private, who because there is a place for anonymous people doing an awful lot of work behind the scenes that you may never see. So that is really valuable as well. Reaching out to organizations or groups or networks that may be doing similar work to what you'd like to get involved in. I think that has a really important place. And I'm going to make a little plug here because one of those organizations is the Parents' Rights Coalition of Canada. And the Parents' Rights Coalition of Canada is a coalition of lots of different organizations, groups with a different focus, but who are aligned in the idea that we need to address the problems with education broadly, but more specifically with transing children and what that means. And so the Parents' Rights Coalition of Canada, Jessica is a member of that with her group DDSB Concerned Parents. We're having a summit, our second summit, on May 25th. So there'll be many speakers. This particular summit appears to have veered in a direction that's focusing on education by accident, it seems. But we have several speakers who are going to be discussing the political turn in education, the critical turn in education. One of those ladies is a Pascale Bourgeois, who is from UQAM in Montreal, and she's an educator. She teaches teacher colleges, so she's training future teachers, and she talks to her students about the Marxist turn and underpinnings of critical pedagogy to her students, and she's going to give a talk on that. We have another really interesting speaker whose name is Stephen Reich, and he recently put out a thesis showing how critical pedagogy is, in fact, the underpinnings of our education system here in Canada. He's done a history on that, a really interesting thesis. So he's also going to be giving a talk of a similar vein. But we also have Chanel Fall, who agreed to join in, and Chanel has been exposing some of this anti-oppression education stuff very diligently for some time now. She's fairly well known. So she's going to be giving another talk. There's also going to be a grassroots panel where people, local groups talking about what they're doing. Missing some people here. So there's Gwen. I cannot remember her last name.
Speaking of well-known, Maria Hughes, the author of the WPATH files, is going to be joining us.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, we had a glass of
Who's going
wine
to be
last
talking
night.
about the WPATH files? Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's going to be a really, really interesting show. Oh, the other one was Gwen. Sorry, I cannot remember her last name. Apologies. She's an ex-NDP member who's defected to the British Columbia Conservatives, and she's going to be giving a talk too. So it's going to be a really interesting panel talking about some of the indoctrination, some of the political radicalization that's been going on, talking about the WPATH files. So that will be an opportunity for people to join in, maybe get talking to other people or get to know some other organizations that are participating. So that's one thing that can be done, because you don't necessarily have to be public in the same way that everyone on this panel is, but there's many people who are working and doing their own sorts of things, communicating behind the scenes, which is also extremely useful. So just before we wrap up, I just want to take a little bit of time to talk about people's individual projects or what they're working on and what we can maybe see coming up. Starting with maybe Jessica, what are you guys working on going forward? What do you want to share?
Well, actually, right now, speaking of plugs, we're looking for parents who participated in the 1 Million March for Children, who felt that the statements that came out from cities like the city of Pickering, calling them anti-LGBTQ and transphobic and so on and so forth, for those who felt that those statements were wrong, to send us an email at DDSB Concerned Parents United at gmail.com, and put in the subject line, I stand for transparency and accountability. We want to put forward an integrity commissioner report calling out towns like this, or cities and boards that have done this to parents and mislabeled them.
What about you two ladies? Are there things that you are going to be doing in the future that you would like to share? This is your pluggable moment.
I don't really need a pluggable moment. I mean, I'm just going to keep on, doing the good fight that I'm doing right now. I mean, every day I seem to be uncovering more and more corruption, let's say at the city level. So, I just need to keep on speaking about it. And I mean, there is a lot of it. And that's, another reason why my counselors have been, as you said, attacking me or, singling me out, is because I am the voice that's speaking about all of the corruption that's happening. I mean, now that, for example, as I had mentioned, is constituents are no longer allowed to record in our council chambers. Myself and some other people, we have taken it upon ourselves to start going through past recordings over this past year. And we have found some inconsistencies of the videos that have been posted where, you can clearly see that they have been manipulated, let's say. There has been time jumps. So, I could be in the middle of speaking and all of a sudden I go to mention a date or something, and all of a sudden, the video at times jumps. So, you lose 6 or 7 seconds of what I'm speaking. And the minutes don't reflect that. So now we're really getting into an area where people are really not going to know the truth of what is happening. So, I got to keep on fighting this and keep on uncovering the truth. Like the other day I said, we need to bring in a third party. If you're not going to allow the people to record in a public space, then, we have to bring in an independent party. And I don't know how that's going to work because, they say the integrity commissioner is an independent party, but who pays the integrity commissioner? Well, it's the city of Pickering, right? So how are we really separating it and making sure that everything is independent? We can't. So it's an uphill battle right now, but if you don't uncover these and you don't let the people know, then they really don't know what's happening. So I'm just going to have to keep on taking the blows and keep on uncovering all of what I believe is corruption one step at a time, and how, they're not very truthful. For example, also is another thing is that, becoming a city councilor and looking over the agenda, I could sit there and I could ask 26 questions on one topic based on a report that I get that I have to read for a meeting. I could ask 26 questions and I might get 2 answers. And yet my colleagues sit there and they just pass it without these critical questions being answered. And I mean, that's very disturbing to see that this is what's happening at the municipal level, which is like, the grassroots level, because this is where policy happens, is at the lowest level, and that's us, right? And I mean, it's just going to get worse as the higher level up in governments that you go. So it's really, really important that we really dig in right now and get rid of all the corruption at this level moving forward. And it's a fight, but you know what? I'm in for the challenge, and I'm not going to back down, because as I said, like with ladies that I have here on this panel as a support system, I'm also like you, Shannon. Like I'm very, very optimistic. We do get so much support behind the scenes, and I don't blame these people again for not speaking up. There will be a time where everybody will just start speaking up. And that time's coming very, very soon, in my opinion, because the whispers are getting louder. People are starting to, be a little bit more forward when you're having conversations with them. It's not so much a whisper in the corner anymore. So I'm very optimistic that the tide is changing. And the more that we uncover like this, we're going to get there. We really are. I'm so
cynics like me definitely need the optimists like you two. I think it balances out.
I know
I need to hear those things sometimes too. When I'm reading some things I'd rather not be reading, frankly. What about you, Linda? What can we expect from you going forward?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm thinking about it. As people say, when a door closes, a window opens. So I'm keeping my eye open for that. I'd like to write a couple of articles, but also I am involved in a group who is determined to seek out trustees that that have the same viewpoint as we all do, and or maybe non-woke trustees. And this is a group of people who have been working on this for several months right now. So, and they are determined to put trustees in who are more like-minded. And so there's a variety of viewpoints as opposed to tending to be one right now. So I'm going to help them with that. And other than that, no, I'm wide open for suggestions.
Yeah, we definitely need viewpoint diversity. Absolutely, not just skin color diversity.
Absolutely,
Well, we need to start looking now for the trustees of the next election. That's what we need to start doing. 100%.
Well, that's what this group is doing. And the other thing is I really want to keep an eye on Bill C-63. I've been emailing MPs to ask them if it comes to a vote, how they will vote. And once I get the answers to that, I think I'll post that so that people are aware. And it's the election coming up for the federal election will be very interesting as well. And I definitely want to be involved in that. I think the incumbent here is not running, so it'll be interesting to see who they put in for Oshawa.
Mm-hmm.
What about you, Shannon?
Well, as we were all talking about upcoming elections, Nadine Ness popped into mind, and she is another one of the guests that we're going to have for our summit on the 25th. If you don't know Nadine Ness, she is a former RCMP officer. She was from Saskatchewan, and she was trained in profiling sexual predators, and she's got quite a big audience. But she's doing a lot of grassroots stuff in Saskatchewan, has over 100 trustees, candidates from what I understand. Their trustee elections are coming up this year. So she's spending a ton of time and energy on that. And probably we can learn some things, as we're all trying to sort this out. We've got 2 years before our next elections here. I've talked to a number of different groups. We have a local fair chapter here in Ottawa that's quite active. Action for Canada, Jess, you mentioned earlier, and there's a couple of other. There's some remnants of some of the freedom people who are here in Ottawa. Some farmer groups here that have some concerns, and everyone's sort of percolating around what we do next. So we're thinking about that next election. Now, speaking of elections. Speaking of elections, I don't know if any of you saw the polls. I know we're getting right to the end of our 90 minutes here. BC polls, it looks like the Conservatives could take BC, and they only had a couple of seats. And John Rustad, Melanie and I talked about this last fall. They've got two people in the legislature, and one of them is reading from the books, and one of the books in the middle school library, and is admonished by the speaker, saying this is conduct unbecoming. You need to withdraw your comments here. And then immediately the ed minister is saying this is age appropriate. Everyone sees the conflict, and it looks like after more than 100 years, we'll see a Conservative government in BC. The BC NDP yesterday rolled back the public consumption of drugs and the decriminalization rules that they put forward. And so there's things can change really, really quickly. And after way too long of far left politics in BC, having a Conservative government in with the right guidance and the right people around them, they can start unwinding some of these layers, trimming back the bush on some of these policies that are derived from, these positivist laws. And
that's where I have hope, Shannon. Thank you for reminding me. That's the one place where I have hope, is that you see around the world that the silent majority is booting these people out. Look at is it Venezuela, where they have the guy who's so enthusiastic that they just voted. And so things are changing. But sorry to interrupt you, Shannon, but that is hopeful.
Yeah, we'll call that the rise of the far right.
Even when you're going around driving your car and stuff, you see more and more vehicles are flying the Canadian flag, things like that. Like, people are taking a stand in their own little way. They're starting to put their voice forward. As you all know, my van is very well decorated. And I'll tell you, Melanie, if you're ever feeling down, come for a ride in my van, because the amount of people that give me a thumbs up and cheer me on and honk at my car enthusiastically when I'm driving down the road, it's fantastic. And I've actually had people approach me when I've been in, say, like a Tim Hortons and stuff like that, and they're like, "Is that your van?" Because I lost all hope till I saw it and saw that I'm not alone. And there are other people out there who want a comprehensive review of everything.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what I'm trying to advocate for, is that we need broad consent, because so many people are unhappy with what's going on. And I think that would be great if we could start talking about the issues as they are, not as some people wish to present it to us, and smear the people who are speaking the truth. So this has been a really great panel. I'm really pleased that you all have taken the time to join us today. It's our first panel on the gender wars. Too many more. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thanks for inviting us. Thanks, Melanie. Thanks, Shannon.
Great having you. Thanks for the conversation, everyone.